Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's lunch hour lecture. I'm Jack Ashby from the Grant Museum of Zoology, and I'm here to host today's talk. I'm very pleased to welcome today's speaker, Dr. Nichola Raihani, who is the Royal Society Research Fellow in the Department of Experimental Psychology here at UCL. Her research focuses on the evolution of cooperation in nature, investigating the ecological causes and evolutionary consequences of individual variation in cooperative behaviour, which places her perfectly to give today's talk, Why Do We Give? Join me in welcoming Dr. Nichola Raihani.
Hi, thanks very much for the introduction. My name's Nichola Raihani, and I am a Royal Society University Research Fellow here at UCL. And even though I'm in the Department of Experimental Psychology, my background is actually in evolutionary biology, and most of my research addresses what most people would think to be a fundamental evolutionary question, which is, why do individuals ever go out of their way to help one another when they could seemingly profit from self-interested behaviour? So if we think about traditional views of natural selection, we tend to think of survival of the fittest, individuals in competition with one another for limited resources. So a kind of naive reading of Darwinian natural selection might predict something like these Jedi squirrels. So if we kind of think that this idea of nature red in tooth and claw and survival of the fittest is actually the outcome of natural selection, is if that's what we should expect from competition for resources, it does seem a bit weird that we often see individuals doing things like this. So by this, what I mean is going out of their way to pay a cost to help others. And so the question I want to ask today is, why do we do things like this? And I particularly want to use charitable giving in humans as an example, but a lot of what we're talking about here could in fact be, this question could be asked of any helpful behaviour in nature. So why do we do things like this? Why are we willing to go out of our way to give away money to help other people? Okay. Well, before we think about why we do things like this, I just want to drill down a little bit into what this question of why actually means and how you might get different types of explanation depending on exactly which question you're asking. And the first person who realised this in biology was a guy called Nico Tinbergen. He was really a pioneer in the field of behavioural ecology, which is basically understanding why individuals do what they do in the environment that they're in. And what he realised is that when you ask the question why, you can actually answer that in one of two very different ways. So you can have two different levels of explanation when you ask the question why. One of the explanations we describe as the proximate explanation, and those types of explanations are typically concerned with the immediate motive or cause or urge that makes you do that behaviour in that setting. And then we can also have an ultimate level explanation, which is more concerned with the function or the evolutionary significance of the trait. So when we think about an ultimate explanation, we're saying, why is it on average that individuals that do this sort of thing have prospered and had offspring and have left their descendants that also do this sort of thing in the next generation? Okay, so to illustrate the distinction, let's just think about it with a completely different example. Why does this lioness hunt? I've put lion, that's bad. Why does the lioness hunt the springbok? So if you want to ask why do lions hunt and kill things, we can think about these two different levels of explanation. And the proximate answer might be she's hungry, so that's just the immediate motive or urge that causes her to hunt and kill things. The ultimate level explanation would be that killing and eating things, on average, increases your chances of surviving, having offspring, and passing your genes to the next generation. So you can see that both types of answer are completely valid. They're not mutually exclusive. They're both important for understanding why the lion does something like hunting and killing springbok. The other thing that's important to realise with these two levels of explanation is that no one would ever imply that the lioness is aware of the ultimate function of why she is going and hunting and killing things. Like, lions don't know this, right? We're pretty sure lions don't know about evolutionary theory and natural selection. they probably don't even really know that they're hungry, but they just respond to a proximate hormonal signal that signals resource shortage. So it's not necessary for individuals to have any awareness about why they're doing things in order for it to be favoured by natural selection. Okay, so let's bring this back to the human example. Why do we give to charity? And here we can see that these proximate and ultimate level explanations can also help us to sort of delineate different explanations for why people help one another. So on the proximate side, we might invoke things like empathy, concern for others, altruistic motivations, religious imperatives, and so on. Whereas on the ultimate side, we really want to know, well, how does doing things like this actually benefit us in the long run? How is giving away money or paying a cost to help other people eventually, under positive selection, how does it benefit the actor in the long run, in the evolutionary sense? And that's how this talk will basically be structured today. So we'll start off thinking about the evolutionary side, like why on average do individuals who are charitable or generous, why on average do they prosper over individuals that are less charitable or less generous? And then we'll move on to explore a little bit more of these proximate psychological motivations to give. Okay, so even though humans are probably the most pro-social species on the planet and perform helping behaviours in a way that no other species does on Earth, there are still plenty examples of individuals helping each other in nature that are not confined to humans. So we know, for example, that this picture on the left here is a picture of naked mole rats. These are one of the most social mammal species that on the Earth. They're basically like the mammal equivalent of an ant. So they all live in an underground tunnel, one great big queen who does all the breeding, and all the other minions around her just have to help and bring food, and they don't get to breed. So we know that there's lots of helpful behaviours going on in this sort of context with lots of species, not just naked mole rats. We also get individuals helping one another when they're not necessarily related, so kind of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours type examples. These happen in primates, lots of ungulates and so on. And we know that in nature, we know we have evolutionary explanations for why individuals engage in these costly helping behaviours. So in the case of the mole rats, for example, ultimately they benefit because they're helping their relatives to breed. So that's a theory that's called kin selection. We know that the maths adds up and that individuals who forego personal reproduction ultimately do okay in the long run in an evolutionary sense because they're helping their relatives to breed. In some cases, individuals help someone they're not related to, but they expect to be helped again in return later. That's the idea of reciprocity. And in some cases, helping behaviour is actually maintained by the threat of punishment. So we have got evolutionary explanations for helping behaviour in nature, but the problem with the type of helping behaviour that we see in humans quite a lot of the time, and particularly with giving to charity, is that none of these explanations actually apply to charity giving. So if you think about what you do when you're giving to charity, you're not helping a relative, so straight away kin selection is out of the window. You're not expecting the beneficiary of your charitable donation to come around and pay you back later or help you out in the future. That isn't usually how it works when you give to charity, so reciprocity seems kind of unlikely. And there's no real threat of punishment for failing to give to charity. So all of our standard evolutionary explanations don't really seem to apply in this setting. So what is going on with charitable giving? Well, here I'd like to talk to you about another possible explanation for helping behaviour, for charity giving in particular, and for helping non-relatives, which is very much a human characteristic. And this explanation is that it could be the case that helping other individuals, even when you're not related to them, even when you think you're never going to see them again, could act as a signal. So this going out of your way to pay a cost to help somebody else out could send a signal to anyone else who is watching. And it could actually signal that you are a helpful individual, and this could do something to improve your reputation. Okay. So let's think about a bit more about how these signals might work. And first, this is a bit of a detour, but if someone could just say, how much is the most you've ever spent on a shirt? Maybe Jack, you can give us how much you've ever spent on a shirt in the past.
40 quid.
Okay, so for most people, the answer would be probably less than this guy. So this guy is called Mr. Datta Puge, and he is wearing a shirt that's made entirely of gold, okay? So the shirt is reputed to be worth $250,000. That's $250,000 for a shirt. The shirt weighs 3 kilograms, which is about the weight of a newborn baby. It can't ever be washed. And whenever he wears it, he has to enlist the help of a security guard to accompany him wherever he goes. So you might think for that amount of money that this should be the best shirt in this guy's wardrobe. But in fact, the item performs very poorly as a shirt. It's kind of impractical. It doesn't seem like a very good shirt at all. So what's going on here? Why has he spent all this money on this shirt that actually doesn't function very well as a shirt at all? And the answer is, of course, that in buying a shirt that costs this much money, it sends a very credible signal as to his extraordinary wealth. I mean, who else but the very wealthy would spend such a sum on such a shirt? So, this concept of signaling, we can see that, in fact, this shirt doesn't function as a shirt, it functions as a signal of wealth. And this concept of signaling has a deep root in evolutionary biology. And that it conveys an important idea, which is that sometimes costly signals can reveal hidden qualities. And all of us will be familiar with this example of peahens who prefer peacocks with the largest tail. So on the face of it, it seems like this huge tail that a peacock grows and carries around with him for his whole life, it seems like a strange thing to evolve. Like, it doesn't have a function. It's actually very costly. You know, it's more predator risk. He has to carry that thing around. It's energetic. So why bother? Like, why does he have to have this huge tail? What's the point of it? And what we know is that actually the point of the tail is that it's a signal to the females. It's something that females like. It's something that females prefer. And this is a way for the male to show to the female that he is a superior individual, that he is an individual of superior genetic quality. And in fact, it's the cost of growing that tail that actually makes that signal so reliable. Because basically, if it was easy to grow a tail like that, if any old peacock could carry a tail around like that, then they should all just do it. And actually, the lower quality males would be able to fake it and deceive the females into believing that they're higher quality than they really are. So what we can see is that sometimes these very extravagant, showy signals that don't seem to have any apparent purpose, they seem to be wasteful in some sense, can actually convey something, some important meaning to observers. Okay, so what does all this peacocks and gold shirts have to do with charitable giving? Well, hopefully by now you might start to agree with me that potentially sometimes helping can signal hidden qualities to observers as well. So just like peacocks might grow a big tail to show off how their hidden genetic quality to a female, it's possible that in humans, helping behaviours actually signal something unobservable about you to an observer. And most likely, although these aren't the only things that it could be signalling, but some of the most likely things that helping behaviour could signal is that you are in fact a kind or a generous person, and as a shorthand for that, we'll just use the term cooperative. You could also be signalling that you simply do have resources and that you are actually an individual that has resources because therefore you have enough resources to give away. So that's also something which is potentially attractive from an observer's point of view. Signalling these types of hidden qualities, and in particular signalling that you are a cooperative individual, is useful because getting a cooperative partner is something desirable. Observers typically, like most people, don't want to interact with people who they think are going to exploit them or cheat them. Most people want to interact with people they feel they can trust, or people who are nice, or and so on and so forth. So signalling that you are this type of person through charitable behaviour might be a good way to get desirable partners yourself. Okay, so what evidence do we have that this is actually going on, that helping behaviour acts as a signal? Well, we know firstly that people care about whether or not they're observed when they're deciding whether to give to charity or not. So most people, if they're observed giving to charity versus if they're giving a donation in private, will be more generous in the observed condition. And there's plenty of papers that have demonstrated this effect, but this is just one that I thought I would describe to you, which I like because it was done in a real-world setting. And so this was done in churches I think it was in Dutch churches, actually. And what the author did was simply measured the size of the donations that were made to the church collection when the donations were relatively private in this collection bag versus when they were relatively public, which is in this more open basket where everyone can see what everyone else is putting in. And sure enough, what they found is that when the donations were quite public, people tended to give larger amounts than when the donations were relatively private. Okay, so people are more generous when they're observed. Even this effect even extends to little children who we know at this age don't have any formal notion of reputation management. So 5-year-old children do not have ideas about how their actions will be perceived by others and about sort of cognitively sophisticated ideas about others' beliefs about them and things like that. Nevertheless, 5-year-old children still take into account whether or not they're going to be observed making a selfish decision or a generous decision, and they're more generous when they're observed than when they are unobserved. So in this study, what the authors did was they had this box set up with the two bars which have the red handle on the end. So the child who was in the actor role had to pull one of those two bars, and that would deliver rewards, which were in the form of stickers, to both him and a confederate. And in this task, the kind of striking thing to me is that no matter what happened in this game, the actor, the decider, was going to get 4 stickers, no matter what. And all they had to do was to decide whether or not the partner could also have 4 stickers, or whether they would just give the partner 1 sticker. So there's no cost to them in this game of being nice. All they have to do is decide whether or not the partner should get 4 stickers as well as them. And what they found is that really the children were only reliably pro-social. They only reliably made sure the partner got the same share as them when the partner could see them and when the partner could see what was going on. So if either of those conditions was violated, like if either the partner couldn't see them or the partner kind of didn't really know what was happening in the game, the kids were kind of pretty selfish. So this kind of makes us think like this sensitivity to audience or this sensitivity to cues of being observed might have quite a deep root in our psychology. Okay, so what's the evidence then that actually signalling your helpful behaviour is beneficial? Is there any evidence that this is the case? Well, it seems like from several lab studies that when you have people play games and they have to compete with one another to signal their generosity, if you then give them the chance to choose partners in that setting, everyone wants to pick the nice guys. So basically, the people who play nice in these lab games that we use to study these sorts of things are typically preferred as partners. And they're also more likely to be elected as leaders of the group. So they're more likely to be elected as individuals who will serve to represent the group's interests. And so it seems like these being seen as being nice or being seen to be cooperative can bring real benefits in these types of settings. Okay, so just back to the peacocks for a minute. So what we discussed already is this idea that extravagant signals can be helpful to observers because they can tell you something that you wouldn't otherwise be able to know about the signalling individual. And a natural consequence of this competition for partners that can happen is that if you've got lots of individuals all competing for the attention of one partner, you can actually have a situation where signals start to escalate and escalate and escalate. And this is known as a process called runaway selection, whereby, to use the example of the peacocks, the tails just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger because the female's preference is almost unlimited for this trait. So she's just always going to go for the biggest tail. And so males are then forced to grow bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger tails as they're in competition with one another over this trait. So is there any evidence that this type of peacocking, this escalation, actually happens in humans as well? Do we have what we could call competitive helping or competitive altruism? And the answer seems to be yes, we do. So in a recent study I did with a co-author from Bristol, we tested this idea using real-world data from online fundraising pages. So we used a large UK fundraising website, which is where individuals host their own fundraising pages. So they're going to do an event for charity. Let's say they're going to do the London Marathon. They'll set up a fundraising page online, and then they'll invite people from their social network. So that typically includes their friends, their family, their colleagues. They'll invite them to this page and ask them to donate to them through this page. And on the website, individuals the fundraisers usually have is there like a pointer or something I can use, or a stick? Oh yeah. So on the page, individuals the fundraisers usually upload a profile photo, which will be here, and they put the amount they're hoping to raise for the charity, as well as whether they've hit their target. And then most importantly for our analysis, all the donations that the donors make to the fundraiser are visible on these pages, and they are listed sequentially. So basically what this does, what we called this is a potential generosity tournament, where donors who arrive on a page can both see and respond to what people have given previously before them on the page. So everyone can see what everyone else has given, and they can respond to that if they want to. And what we were interested in is there any evidence in this setting, in these online fundraising pages, that donors compete with one another to try and show off generosity? Okay, so we used around 11,000 pages from the 2014 London Marathon to answer this question. And on these pages, usually the average amount that one donor would give would be about £30. So larger and smaller amounts obviously happen as well, but on average people give about £30 when they donate. So the first question we needed to know in order to get at this question is, do donors actually care about what other donors have given before them? Do they even pay attention to it? Or do they just come along, they've got an amount in their mind and they give whatever they were going to give, irrespective of what other people have given? And it turns out that yes, donors do care about what others have given before them. So what we found is that after a large donation has been made on these web pages, so this is the big bar in the middle is one single large donation that was made on a fundraising page, and you can see that these are the donations before the large donation, and then after a large donation has been made, you tend to see an increase of around £10 on average in all the subsequent donations that follow, and that effect is quite persistent, so it persists for at least 10 donations after a large donation has been made. So we thought, okay, this is interesting, but we wanted to explore this effect a little bit more and ask if there was any particular category of donor who might be responding more to these large donations. And we were informed by previous studies which have shown that in humans, females place more emphasis than males on signals of wealth and helpfulness. So females care about wealth and helpfulness when they're choosing an opposite sex partner. Whereas men tend to care more about physical cues of fertility, which are usually proxied by attractiveness. So our prediction was that because wealth and helpfulness can both be signaled by charitable donations, if there's any competition going on, we expected it would be that male donors would be competing to signal to females and not the other way around. And we expected that this effect would be particularly strong when the fundraiser that they were giving to was an attractive female. Okay, so we explored this effect using the same data set, and we just used the same way of asking it. And what we did was we calculated the average of all the donations prior to the large donation. Here would be a large donation. And then we ask for each donation after the large donation, how much increase is there relative to what this pre-average was? And how is that explained by whether the donor was male or responding to donation by another male, and whether the fundraiser is female. Okay, so I'll just show you, this graph has got quite a lot going on, so I'll just break it down for you before I present you the results. So all I'm showing here is what male donors did. I'm not showing you what female donors did because we explored that and there was nothing interesting happening with females. You can ask me about that afterwards if you want to. So I'm just showing you what male donors did. But I'm showing you their responses in two broad categories. So I'm showing you how they respond when the large donation was made by another man. That's a competitor. So if you're responding to another guy, what do you do? And what do you do if you're responding to a girl who's made a large donation or a female who's made a large donation? And not only this, but we also break down the responses according to the fundraiser gender, so female or male, and also how attractive they are. So the size of these little icons depicts how attractive the independent raters scored the fundraisers as being. So basically, yeah, the bigger the icon, the more attractive the fundraiser was rated to be, not by me, I hasten to add. Okay. Okay, so what did we find? Basically, what you see is that large donations always cause an upswing to some extent in male donors' responses. So in every condition, males are responding to a large donation. But the only case where you see a significantly different effect from all the others, and this effect, by the way, is around 4 times the size of any of the effects in any of the other conditions, are when men are responding to a donation made by another man and when they're giving to the most attractive female fundraisers. So we don't see this effect in any other condition, and it's exactly where you would predict it based on the evolutionary insights. Okay, so seems like men compete to advertise generosity when they're giving to attractive females, when they're competing with members of the same sex. Okay, so quick summary so far is that we can benefit from helping others because it allows us to signal hidden qualities. People are more generous when they're observed, and even when the observer is attractive. And the most generous people are preferred as partners and can gain social prestige. Okay, so I just want to quickly run through a little bit on the proximate side of why do we do things like this from a proximate perspective. What are the sort of motives or drives that lead us to behave this way? How has our psychology been designed to make us give in these situations? Okay, and one thing perhaps many people will be familiar with is that we know that helping leads to this, what's been called the warm glow of giving. All that basically means is helping others makes us feel good. It activates the exact same areas in our brain that have been implicated in receiving money, in eating nice food, in having sex. All these reward areas in our brain that light up when we get self-rewards also light up when we help others. So helping seems to be subjectively rewarding. It feels nice to help other people, and this has been called the warm glow of giving. And again, this warm glow of giving, there is some evidence for this in children as well. So in this experiment, they had kids play with a puppet, and then they asked the child to give the puppet away to another toy. I think that was how the experiment went. Or the children had a treat, and then they had to give the treat to a puppet. And basically what they found is that children looked happiest. I mean, obviously this is kind of a bit subjective, how happy a child looks, I suppose. But basically when the child gives their own treat to the puppet, they were rated by blind observers as looking the most happy. So it seems like there might be something similar happening in children as well. Okay, so my argument here is that this warm glow, this subjective, nice feeling of helping others is actually an evolved psychological trait that makes us feel good about behaving in a way that's ultimately in our long-term evolutionary interest. So it's a way for our brains to get us to do something that's actually good for us to do. It's good to look good. So our brains designed us a psychology that makes us feel good about being good. So just like hunger is an evolved psychological state that makes us want to find food and eat it, potentially this warm glow is an evolved state that makes us want to help other people. Nevertheless, just as some foods are more tempting than others, some situations are also more likely to dial up this warm glow, or they're also more conducive to helping than others. So what might these be? So these are just a few examples, and there are obviously lots of ways in which helping behaviour can vary, but I just pulled out some that I find particularly interesting. So one study that was very, very famous has found that we help more when we think others are also being helpful. So this study wasn't done by me. This is very famous in the behavioural science literature. In fact, many of you might have unwittingly kind of been subject to an effect like this. If you've stayed in hotels recently, many times nowadays, you'll notice that in the bathroom there'll be a little sign saying, please, if you want to reuse your towel, then hang it up, and if you don't want to reuse it, then throw it on the floor, okay? So nowadays, hotels always have these little signs in the bathroom. And what the authors of this study did was, they wanted to figure out to what extent could we actually make people reuse the towel by varying the wording on the little note that's presented to you. And so they tried out different iterations of this. One version of the note read that if you reuse your towels, we'll make a donation to an environmental charity. You know, that was reasonably effective. They got about a 38% towel reuse rate. If they also indicate that not only will they give to this charity, but also that it'll help keep the running costs of the hotel down, that seems to be more effective again. So around 48% of people will reuse their towel in that condition. But the most effective thing that you can say to people, actually, strangely enough, in this situation, is not really to do with the costs of washing towels for the hotel or anything like that. If you say to people, 75% of people who stay in this hotel reuse their towels, most people will reuse their towel at that point. So just telling people what other people do in that situation is enough to nudge them towards the thing you want them to do. And in fact, I haven't shown it here, but what they found was even more effective than just saying 75% of people, is if you say 75% of people who stayed in this room reuse their towel. That really, like, something about that makes people want to reuse their towel. It's like, people like me reuse the towel, so I'll do it as well. Okay, so we copy other people. Another thing that affects how willing we are to give is really how the ask is presented to us and how we perceive the victims. And one effect that's been shown time and time again to be very important in determining how much we give or willingness to give is whether there's a lot of people that seem to be in need or whether it's just one person. So basically, we know that people care more about identifiable victims, this one here, much more than statistical or non-identifiable victims. And it seems like this effect arises because donors like to have impact. So what seems to be very rewarding for people subjectively is knowing how their donation is going to have an impact on the beneficiary. So people like to know that they're going to buy that kid lunch. They don't want to know that their donation is going to be spent on the next advertising campaign for the charity. That is the major turn-off for donors. They like to have an identifiable victim and they want to know what they're doing for that identifiable victim. So donors like to have impact, and it seems like this effect arises because of a feeling of responsibility. So just very quickly to describe this study, what the authors of this study did was they went around a shopping centre with an iPad and they approached shoppers and said, please, can you help us? We want to buy school books for these girls. This is the girl you've been allocated. Will you buy her some school books or not? But they had different conditions, and what they found was that in a situation where they just showed all the girls and they didn't give anybody an allocated girl, that wasn't very effective at getting people to donate. If they said, this is the girl that's been allocated to you, will you buy her school books? That was quite effective. Around 49% of people gave money in that condition. But what they did in the final version of the experiment, which was quite clever in a way, is that they said, okay, here's your girl, you've been allocated this girl. If you don't fund her, we're not going to ask anybody else to fund her. So it's either you or it's no one. And if you say no, we're just going to move on to the next girl. And when they did that treatment, people really gave a lot. In 72% of the cases, then people gave to their identifiable victim. So it seems like there's quite an effective feeling responsible, like if I don't do it, no one will, that makes people feel like they ought to give. Okay, so then this is the final thing, and then I'll finish up. So sometimes I talk about things like this, and then people always want to say to me, oh, but when I give, I don't care about reputation because I give anonymously. So it can't all be about reputation, and there must be something else going on. And I think that is a very valid critique. And it's something that I think is actually very interesting, is why do people give anonymously? So if we are all about reputation benefits and signalling how good we are and whatnot, then we shouldn't really expect any anonymous giving because it can't help your reputation. Nevertheless, we know people do it. So on these online fundraising sites, they offer an option to be anonymous, and people take it. So people do give anonymously sometimes. And in fact, this happens on up to 12% of all donations. So it's not just a kind of anomaly or a mistake. It seems, people do give anonymously sometimes. So why do they give anonymously? Well, one reason might be because humans are like no other species on Earth. Humans are very adept at inferring motives and beliefs from other people, right? And we know that, because we know that there are potential reputation benefits to be had from signalling charitable behaviour, we get very suspicious about anybody who seems to be giving with that motive in mind. So making a charitable donation and then telling everybody you did it is actually more harmful to your reputation than perhaps just not telling anybody in the first place. And I think it was Oscar Wilde who said that the best thing that can ever happen to you is to give anonymously and then be found out for it. And I think that is really true. I mean, if you could give anonymously but definitely be found out somehow, that is the best thing to do. So we know that giving makes us look good. Showy acts of generosity set off alarm bells. We're thinking, hang on, why are you doing this because you care about the charity and you're nice, or are you doing this because you're calculating your reputational gains? And just to show you that it seems like potentially this idea that really, really showy acts of helping behaviour might carry reputation costs has some support in the literature. So this was a study that I did again using online fundraising pages, and I found that people are overwhelmingly more likely to anonymise their donation when they're giving an amount that's different to what everybody else has given on that page. So people who are giving a relatively small amount tend to hide it, but way more than that, people who are giving an excessively generous amount also tend to hide it. And there's been other work that's shown that potentially these people who are excessively generous, who go against the group norm, whatever that norm might be, actually incur reputation costs rather than reputation benefits. Okay, so just to sum up, it seems like helping likely brings its own evolutionary reward in the form of reputation benefits. People do seem to be aware of these reputation consequences, and they do dial up or down as the situation dictates. Nevertheless, we don't necessarily want to say that all helping behaviour is consciously aimed at improving reputation, because there are also these other proximate mechanisms I've talked about that can also be important, and we might not necessarily always be thinking about, is someone watching me, how are they going to view this, and so on. That isn't always at the forefront of your mind, or not even often at the forefront of your mind, perhaps. But nevertheless, all these proximate motives that we've discussed are a product of your evolved psychology. Okay, so thank you very much for listening. And just to point out, it is UCL Philanthropy Month, so you could get a good reputation by giving to the UCL alumni now if you wanted to. Thanks for listening, and thank you for coming.
Thank you very much indeed, Nichola. That's a fantastic talk and a great way to kick off Philanthropy Month. Unfortunately, we have a 2 o'clock lecture in here, so we don't have any time for questions. So I'm sorry about that, but thank you all for coming, but thanks mostly to Dr. Nichola Raihani.